Yeah, I just like to recognize Trooper Palmer, who is back in Montana finally after a long stint of recovery in Utah, and just want to thank him and his family for their sacrifices for public safety and for the safety of Missoula County residents.
Thank you. That's amazing. And is there any public comment on items that are not on today's agenda? All right, please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Devin Jackson, and I'm here as a citizen, and I will try and be as brief as possible. I have with me a list of homeowners' names in support of proposal sent to the commissioners from Lolo Community Council with regards to speed limits in South Lolo. We are collecting more. These are just homeowners on Delarca. We also have name collecting going on up Caris and Mormon Creek. Hopefully we'll present those to the commissioners sometime in the event that more community support is needed before action is taken. Thank you. And I have a statement I'd like to read to the commissioners. My name is Devin Jackson. I'm here as a private citizen. I am not representing Lolo Community Council or any other groups I may be a member of. As the commission knows, there are 7 community councils created to serve at the pleasure of the commissioners. The job of these councils is to bring community concerns to the county commissioners for action. Board members are volunteers, and keeping members on these boards is not always easy. Often council members, because they feel they are unable to make a difference, leave these positions. The commissioners remind members of these councils every time one of us attends a commissioners meeting that these councils are advisory boards and they have no actual power. Our requests are suggestions and they're not binding in any way. This can make accomplishing anything for our communities frustrating. The creation of CAPS helps the councils work with the county agencies to get some things done, but sometimes official action from the Board of Commissioners is required. The community often sees no result from the requests made by their council, increasing the appearance of being ignored. Since the commissioners recognize that these communities are important enough to their duties to assign councils to them, it seems reasonable to me to request that the commissioners hold official hearings in these communities once a year. This would make the commissioners more visible to the community. It would help the councils boost interest in their actions, and it would also allow the communities to express directly to the commissioners what the most important issues are to them. These communities are very invested in these issues, and they can't all come to Missoula, 70 miles away in some cases, in the middle of the day, in the middle of the week. Our communities are a very large portion of the county's tax base, and we shouldn't have to rent buses to get people here on a Thursday to get speed limit changed. I understand that voting base inside the city, but it is time that these communities get treated like the county actually cares that they are a part of it. All of our communities have government buildings, schools capable of hosting you. If they're safe enough for our kids, they're safe enough for our elected officials. The Montana Supreme Court holds session in the county seat of each county in the state every year. I think it's reasonable to expect that the 3-person board of county commissioners can find 7 days a year to visit with these communities they are responsible for in an official manner. The communities would then be able to know their official action was taken or why not. It's a fair expectation for such a large part of the tax base. I'm making this
3 minutes, just so you know.
Sorry. I'm making this recommendation, suggestion, proposal, or whatever you call it as a private citizen because I think as a taxpayer, the commissioners might consider their responsibility to me. If I made this request as an elected official representing Lolo, the commissioners have no requirements to even consider this proposal at a hearing. That is why our councils can't keep members and why keeping up community interest in those meetings is almost impossible. I think this request might go a long way to solving that. Devin Jackson.
Thank you. You can leave that with Emmy. She'll get copies. For the record, I live in Lolo, have attended multiple Lolo Community Council meetings, and every request that has been brought to the Commission by the Lolo Community Council has been addressed. The speed studies requested were performed in 2018, and there is an ongoing safety study south of Lolo on the highway, as requested by the Lolo Community Council. Is there any other public comment on items not on today's agenda? All right. The current claims list includes claims received as of May 1st, 2019 through May 15th, 2019 by our office, and they total $4,837,436.48. As always, you can go to our agendas and click on the claims list and see what all adds up to that total of $4.8 million. We have 3 hearings today. First up is the Sawmill Gulch Road petition, and I will open that hearing with a staff report.
Hello, Commissioners, and the rest of you. My name is Steve Nide, County Surveyor's Office, and at the last hearing for this petition on April 11th, you Commissioners asked that county staff, the petitioners, and the Forest Service meet and come up with a range of options to address the problems and concerns surrounding this road. You directed that the options were to include a range from denying the petition and doing nothing to a much more ambitious approach that included granting the petition and even including some cooperation with the city on maintenance issues. You made it clear to us that you wanted to address the signage, the parking enforcement, and the maintenance from both a resident standpoint and a recreationist standpoint. So a working group was formed, included representatives of the petitioners, the county, the Forest Service, and the city. We met face-to-face for an hour each week after that April 11th meeting, and I'm sure several of us worked on this outside of those face-to-face meetings. Shane Stack, the Public Works Director, led those meetings, and he brought to the table a decision matrix that he had become accustomed to with the state, which was quite helpful. We had so many concerns and so many issues to tackle. The matrix helped us bring those together into a more concise manner and allowed us to start to evaluate each of those concerns and how those concerns were then addressed by the different options that we came up with. So collectively, we collaborated and scored through that matrix how each option would affect each of those concerns, and eventually we came up with a list of about, if I remember right, 12 or 13 options. Some of those were really outside of the scope of the petition that's being addressed today, and I'll leave those aside for now. Those are more long-term solutions. We basically, let me get back to my script a little bit here so I don't get too off topic. So in the end, after doing all of this discussion and evaluation, we have a recommendation for you commissioners, and that is to go ahead and grant the petition that the petitioners requested, basically, essentially, just like they requested it, from the end of the current county road right-of-way to the north line of section 30, which was it? 34, which is the gate, the current locked gate, which is about a quarter mile past Russian Joe Road. And that right-of-way would be a full statutory 60-foot in width. I will go on to say that the granting of this road petition is not necessarily in itself going to solve all these problems that we've identified. But it is a first step and a necessary first step in doing some additional signage and maintenance, and hopefully that will at least begin to solve some of the problems. And that's my report from that working group. I'd be glad to have any other member that's present chime in.
I just ask a question for Shane. What's the expected level of maintenance if we go through with this?
So what we discussed in the group was we would provide snow removal like similar to what was done this last winter with a grader going in once in a while in the wintertime, not regular daily snow removal. It would just be when we do have a grader in the area, we can get in there and widen the snow berms and move them out of the way, so to speak. So it provides a little bit more room for vehicles. But that's what we discussed with the representatives with all the groups, and we left those meetings with that understanding and agreeing to that level of service.
Would that go all the way to the gate?
We had talked originally just about going to the Y, but we can certainly get into the details of future maintenance.
Another question for Shane. So is it correct that granting the petition to designate this as a county road would be a prerequisite for some possible improvement solutions like a flap grant?
So it's a good question, Dave. I did do some research on the flap, and flap is a Federal Lands Access Program, and it's a federal aid program that counties or cities, local jurisdictions can apply for to improve roadway networks that access federal land, such as the National Forest Service. One of the requirements is that if you do apply, somebody has to agree to maintain those facilities that are built. And in this case, if we did use Federal Lands Access Program to improve the access into the forest through, say, Sawmill or Russian Joe, somebody would have to agree to maintain those roadways. In this particular case, if we did not grant the petition, half of that roadway would be public easement, but it would not be maintained, and therefore you could not apply for flap for that component.
So how would us adopting this road affect our ability to enforce parking?
Commissioner, if it's not a county road, the county doesn't have the authority to enact parking restrictions. And so you would not have the ability if it's not designated a county road.
I'm just wondering, is there any representative from the Forest Service here today?
Okay, good, I can badmouth them then.
Okay, I was just interested what their take was. Yeah, I guess we'll just speculate.
I just want to throw out a bit of caution as I'm personally enthusiastic about this, but also being realistic that this step, should we choose to take it, is just but a first step. And this step alone does not solve the problems that Steve laid out around maintenance and enforcement and parking and all the rest. This is just the first step. And in order for us to really achieve thorough problem solving, my view is that group will need to continue meeting and dream up some ways that we use this step as a platform to get to really solving the problem, which I would say is all of our goals. But just want to be realistic that this alone doesn't do it, and we're going to continue to have to kind of keep our sleeves rolled up and get after it the next couple months to figure out how we get from here to there. I just can't shut up. So that I say this to the residents, because you all are here as an organized group. You've done a great job. However, there's a larger constituency of people affected by this who are not similarly organized because they don't live in the same place, don't share a homeowners association, or even an affiliation around one typical activity, and that is all the recreators that make use of this road. And for me personally, I'm moved by the fact that so many people use this road to take advantage of their public lands. So I want to facilitate that, seeing that access to our public lands for recreation is a central part of our culture and economy, and want to enhance and build off of that. That in my mind, if all there was you good people and no recreators, most likely you just would have taken care of this, and that we would not be taking this action because of these 5 households, but because of the hundreds of people that use this road for recreation and inadvertently affect themselves negatively and affect you all. So that's enough for me.
Thanks. Were there any more questions for staff from you two? Oh, do you have a comment?
I did. I just got an email from my office, and
Can you speak into the mic?
Bridegham I just got an email from my office. Patrick Bridegram of the Forest Service is running late, but he's going to be here. Okay?
Well, we'll stall then.
Delay a vote into.
Well, since I have a moment, for the record, I would like to just list the issues of concern that we brought together and tried to address individually. And there's 20 of them. There's winter maintenance, road surface maintenance, signing, parking, drainage, road width and alignment, sight distance, public safety, liability for residents, county control within the right-of-way, cost to county, cost to Forest Service, cost to residents, cost to public, preservation of the character of the area, expectations by others, defined legal right-of-way, trespass and vandalism, regulatory hurdles, and accessibility to the Forest Service property. So those were the issues that kind of coalesced into those defined issues that we then tried to address with those multiple options.
Thanks. And is the applicant or the applicant's representative want to speak, or would y'all rather just speak under public comment? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Thanks.
Does this mean we have pictures of cars in the ditch?
It's hard to follow Steve Nide. No pictures, no PowerPoint. I will say that, led by Shane, they were very productive meetings we've had over the last few weeks. I don't know how he managed to take what was a 12-arm octopus and put some meaning to it and put it into a matrix that actually made sense to, I think, our whole group. And I think he did a great job. I agree with you, Josh, that this is the first step. But I would argue, as a county, and it isn't an argument, I think we're all in agreement here. I am a avid mountain biker and hiker and recreationalist. I travel all over the country to do this stuff and have for more than 30 years. The rattlesnake might be the single best recreation area for mountain biking in the country. And that includes places like Sedona and Moab and other places that are legendary. Now, it's a little secret because it hasn't been written up. I refuse to do my television shows there because I live there. But it is an amazing place, and it's a jewel in this town. We have others. Patty Creek is good. There are places people can go, but there is nothing I've ever seen quite like the rattlesnake. And I think for that reason, ultimately, a flap grant should be pursued on this thing because I think it has tremendous benefits. I think the other issue that we all see, because we live it each day, is the public safety. Left to our own, we could take care of the road and, we have managed to do it. Candace, for I don't know how many years she's lived up there, way more than I. I've been there about 10 years. But the difference between now and 10 years ago is the amount of traffic. And it isn't residents because it's limited. It's the public. And I think this is a good first step. I think the ability to address the concerns that we all have laid out down the road could maybe happen after this. And I hope the Forest Service gentleman gets here because he was in our meeting last week, and if I'm not overstating it, he seemed to be in agreement with some of what we were talking about. But ultimately, the Forest Service does what the Forest Service does. I want to thank you guys, though. I thank everybody for the time and effort and busy schedules to do this. That's it. No PowerPoint.
You're not the Forest Service guy, are you, sir? No? All right. I didn't think so. I was just checking. All right. Well, then at this point, we'll open up public comment on the Sawmill Gulch Road petition. Is there any public comment? We've exhausted you with so many meetings on this topic. All right. Seeing no public comment, we will close the hearing and have discussion.
So, rumor has it the Forest Service gentleman will be coming, but who knows how long. Could you guys characterize or be so bold as to characterize what the Forest Service's position has been throughout this process? They're all pointing to the attorney.
Yes.
Well, I was probably the first one who approached the Forest Service, and I did that at the request of the petitioners, because the Forest Service, of course, owns half of from the center line of the asphalt north, and they needed to be a party that consented or otherwise waived a claim for damages under this petition. So I reached out to an attorney in the Office of General Counsel, my friend Babick, and talked to him about this early last summer, and gave him a sense of what the petitioners might be bringing forward. He worked with many people in the Forest Service for a few months to get to a point where he came back to me and said, "John, we're in agreement in principle to having this be designated as a county road." The agreement, though, that I made with him is that because this is federal land and we cannot unilaterally classify federal property, there will, if this petition is granted, there will ultimately be an easement that the Forest Service will grant to Missoula County for that portion of the county road that's designated on the Forest Service. And I made that agreement with them, understanding that we would go forward with a relationship of trust. And then the petition was filed, and it represented that the Forest Service consented in principle to the petition and would not be asking for damages for the infringement on their federal property rights. And then after that, of course, the Forest Service was at the road viewing that we had earlier this spring, and participated and talked, and I think understands that they're part of the solution. Gave us some options that they had in terms of their law enforcement officer and what they can do in terms of the parking and signage issues. And then at some of the meetings that we had prior to this meeting, I put the Forest Service representative on the spot and said, I had heard from your district ranger that an administrative order regarding parking was a possibility for her as a district ranger, that she could ask the forest supervisor for something like that. If you're at this meeting on May 23rd and the commissioners ask you point blank, is that something that the Forest Service is going to support? Are you going to be able to respond? And he said, yeah, we're supportive of that. So that is an option that they have in their back pocket also, irrespective of our parking regulation options if this is designated as a county road. So I didn't get the sense, and maybe others that were there did, I didn't get the sense that the Forest Service did not want to be a cooperating partner in finding long-term solutions for this situation going forward.
And they were okay with the easement width?
They did identify that a 60-foot width, the statutory 60-foot right-of-way, would be very close to or cross the pedestrian bike trail that's on the north side of Sawmill Gulch. I think it's known as the Ewok Trail. It takes off from the main trailhead and parallels the road on the north side of the road all the way up to the Forest Service gate, and then it joins the old road there. So they are not opposed to a 60-foot right-of-way. They are concerned about any future infringement on that trail. And I'm confident, I can't say exactly how it will happen, but I'm confident that as as our surveyor's office and their surveyor's office puts together an easement document, in the future, granting Missoula County an easement for its county road through Sawmill Gulch, that the issue of the Ewok Trail can be addressed satisfactorily.
John, what's the process on getting that easement?
I think the Forest Service will do a survey and come up with a legal description, a fairly precise legal description that then our surveyor, Steve Nide, will review, and then we'll collectively will come to terms on that easement document.
So I've already produced a drawing from a survey, field survey that I did. I would expect to incorporate that into a resolution, as we usually file a resolution when a petition is granted, and that resolution would reference that exhibit. I don't know that that will be adequate for their purposes. It will be adequate for our purposes. If they want to follow up with an easement, which they will, and they want a more precisely defined description, let them have at it. But I don't feel it incumbent upon us to provide that.
And that's accurate. They understand that. I mean, they've seen the survey document that Steve Nide prepared that's part of the petition. That won't be satisfactory for them. I made it clear to them that then it would be their time, energy, and resources that they would put into to doing whatever additional survey work and legal documentation would be necessary, and they're fine with that. That's what they do to protect their federal interests.
Would the timeline on this easement have any effect on our legal ability to do the level of maintenance that Shane described?
No.
Thanks.
Any further questions or discussion, or are we ready for a motion?
Do we have to wait for them, for the Forest Service, or can we?
We don't have to. If we want to, we could go to our other items and come back to it, or is that the preferred?
Should we do that?
Do you guys want to wait for them, or?
Yeah, if we could, I wouldn't want the individual's feelings to be hurt that he wasted his time racing across town, but.
Are you the Forest Service guy? Yay!
Pick up time. All right.
We were just about to postpone it for you.
Actually, you were just about to donate us a couple trucks. Excellent work. Thank you. Your generosity is really appreciated.
Do you want to go ahead and just come up to the microphone and introduce yourself? And I don't know if you have a statement you'd like to make or anything, or if you guys just have questions for him.
No, I don't have any statement. I came to be here for questions and to provide some input from Jen Henzig, the district ranger of the Missoula district on the Lolo National Forest. So I'm Patrick
You
Brittingham.
are?
I'm Patrick Brittingham. I'm a realty specialist I work for the Lolo National Forest.
So what's your position on granting an easement for us as we adopt this road?
As far as we've been having conversations as part of the working group, and as this has been going along from the beginning, our position has always been that we are willing to grant a public road easement to the county for the portions of the road that are on Forest Service land, excluding the portions of the trail that are very, very close to the road there. And this is what we've talked about. But basically, we would just need to make sure that the easement area identified in that easement is appropriate for us as well as the county.
Well, it sounds like if we did a 60-foot easement, it's like 20, in one spot it's 26 feet to the Ewok Trail, in one place it's 29 feet. There's two places. And you would not want the easement to touch that at all? Like we would negotiate a cutout or a shift or?
Correct. It would need to be a variable width in those places, and we would, if you wanted the full width, you'd need to push the other direction onto the private in those areas.
Okay. Because I think we were discussing having just the straight old 60-foot, and that at points allowing the encroachment of the trail, but it sounds like the Forest Service would not want any easement over the existing trail.
Would you consider?
Can you get a microphone, Steve?
Would the Forest Service consider a slight relocation to bring the trail outside of that 60-foot line? And I'm talking a very slight, stretch. of
I
trail.
would need to talk, that's obviously outside my decision space, but I believe, Jen, if we're talking minor adjustments to the alignment in order to provide a benefit to the county, and it's not going to have any detriment to the public experience on that trail, I have to believe she's open to those as reasonable, what's the word?
Accommodations.
Thank you, accommodations. I just know that this trail for us, protecting this trail corridor is a huge concern, and it's something that Jen is very passionate about. So I don't want to put words in her mouth and create expectations that she may not be willing to, honor as we go forward. So I want to say that the intention on our end has been to not grant a right-of-way that would include any portion of the trail. If there needs to be a combination made to make everything simpler and make more sense, and it's all, if it's all intuitive and it's not going to be a detriment to the trail, I have to believe Jen has some ability to relocate that trail in small areas. I think our problem with those were the grade and the slope. We had some concerns with some of the areas where the trail is very close to the road are fairly steep, and I think there were concerns about a small relocation may turn into a 30-foot relocation because we just can't move it up the slope very much. So it's all local considerations, basically.
Okay, so maybe when we put together the exhibit, we can make sure that it's going to be okay to all parties before we would file the exhibit so that we've had those
Absolutely.
conversations by the time we get to the easement.
Yeah, and the exhibit itself will be a part of the easement, but typically we would have the exhibit first. We would all agree to it, and then we would include it in the easement itself.
All right,
So-
great. Sounds good. Any more questions?
I do not. Are we ready for a motion?
Ready for a motion?
Again, I apologize for
Thank
being
you.
late.
Thank you
No.
for coming.
Thank you. That was dramatic.
Yeah, you did well.
The administrative order, I know we had talked about that.
The question on the floor is were there any questions about the administrative order?
I don't have any at this time.
Thanks.
Make sure I get the language right.
Your microphone.
Is that the right? I would move that we approve the petition to establish that portion of the Sawmill Gulch Road right-of-way beginning at the northwesterly end of COS 3862, continuing through sections 34 and 35, T14 North, R19 West, PMM, and extending to the north boundary of section 34 as a county road.
I'll second it. And in terms of speaking to the motion, I am supportive. First off, thanks to staff for the incredible work you guys have done in working with various parties to navigate what's been a protracted discussion for many years. And while this certainly is not a final solution to all of the problems that have been identified on Sawmill Gulch Road, I do think it's a prerequisite to taking some of the possible actions that we have already identified towards that end. I thank you all for your participation as residents in Sawmill Gulch. I know we've received some comment from the public that is this a slippery slope in terms of if we take an action like this on Sawmill Gulch Road, how might that kind of cascade or set a precedent for anywhere else in Missoula County that's currently either a county road that's not maintained or a road that's in some ambiguous status that might be petitioned to become a county road. And my response to that is that there are some pretty unique characteristics of Sawmill Gulch Road. Chiefly among them is that this is an extremely popular recreation area, arguably probably one of the most popular recreation areas on the Lolo National Forest and maybe Region 1 of the U.S. Forest Service. And as a result, that makes this a somewhat unique situation that deserves a higher level of attention than some other roads, and also from the public safety standpoint, not just from the standpoint of can recreationalists get up and down this road without completely blocking passage for residents who live there, but there certainly from our law enforcement professionals with Missoula County, we've been reinforced that there are clearly public safety and health issues that have not been adequately addressed heretofore. So I'm supportive of the motion.
Can I do one other? So I also wanted to echo my thanks to staff and to the residents and for your patience with this process, and wanted to call one feature out here in us arriving at some solution that technical expertise is sufficient, but not necessary, but not sufficient for us to get to a solution. And to really get to this solution required a different type of skills, and it's one that Shane exemplified and you gentlemen did as well. And that's being able to cooperate and work through process and talk things out. And I applaud you all for doing that, and hope that this can be a model for the next set of thorny issues we run into. So thanks.
Thanks. And I'll just be echoing really what's already been said. To reiterate, this actual step doesn't solve any of the problems that exist on Sawmill Gulch Road, but looking at the 13 solutions that may exist in the future and what baby steps might be taken to address different pieces of the problems that do exist, this is a prerequisite to do any of those. If we deny the petition, essentially none of the potential solutions could work out moving forward. And so it is the first step, and there will be a lot of steps to come and a lot of further meetings to come, but you'll never get sick of us, right? So I do think we've come to a new ability to be productive and have conversations and move things forward on this, so that's great. And also echoing, we do get a lot of people who want the county to take on their road. And the county simply can't maintain all the roads we have. We can only maintain about half the roads that we already have. And so sometimes we're very reticent to take on more than we can chew and continue to add roads to our inventory. But what sets this one apart is that it's not that the residents are having a problem with their road and they bought it there and they knew it was going to be like that, and now they want to come back on the county for help. It's that the public accessing the federal land here is causing a big problem for the public and for the residents. So this is pretty unique in the fact that it's the actual public access to the federal lands that is causing the problems. So that's how I see this differently than some of the other petitions that we have not been so excited about taking on more roads into our inventory. So, Dave?
Yeah, and I should just say that about a month ago, on opening day of turkey season, my son wanted to go archery turkey hunting up in the National Recreation Area, which can be accessed by Sawmill Gulch. And I told my wife, whatever you do, do not drive up Sawmill Gulch Road. Park at the base and let them hike. So I'm for what it's worth.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right, next up, we have a hearing for a sewer main extension. I will open that hearing with the staff report from Public Works.
Thank you, Eric Dixon, County Engineer. On April 29th of this year, we received an excavation permit application from Tanya Kuhl and her representative, Eli and Associates, for a water main extension into Kona Ranch Road, just west of Mullen Road. Section 2.4 of our Public Works Manual requires that excavation permits for water and sewer main extensions be approved by the Board of County Commissioners at a regularly scheduled public meeting. The applicants submitted their application. They have met the requirements for the public notice in advance of this meeting. The proposed sewer main extension does not cross Kona Ranch Road. It does not get into the asphalt. It connects to an existing lift station for the force main for the city sewer. and it's only a couple hundred feet on the edge of the right-of-way. We believe that all the requirements have been met, and staff would recommend that the excavation permit be approved.
Any questions for Eric? All right, is there a representative here for this, for the applicant? Thanks.
I'm Tom Anderson with Eli and Associates. Do you have the exhibits in paper form? Okay. I have extra ones if you want them, but do you have any questions regarding this sewer main? It's just a gravity-fed system and primarily serve Tract A. Well, it will serve Tract A right now, with the possibility of extension in the future. But no plans for that as of yet.
Questions?
I guess my only question would be for Shane or Eric. Maybe it's just so infrequently that we see these things, but these require BCC approval and are not just administratively granted a permit like this?
That is my understanding. Yeah, they are very rare. I know it's never a popular answer, but it's always been that way. When we drafted the Public Works Manual originally in 2010, we were working on previous policy, so we just incorporated it into the manual, and that's been included in every revision since then. The latest was just over a year ago, so I don't know if there's any concern or need that these sorts of main extensions are approved this way. John, I don't know if there's a legal requirement, but I think it's just been for the fact that, being a city service, either water or sewer, if they are going to occupy the county's right-of-way, I guess we just want to make sure that everyone is aware of the issue and approves of the use.
Okay. It's the way we've always done it. Very good.
The last part of the answer makes sense, though, too. That you're right. If we're putting another jurisdiction's infrastructure on our land, it does make sense to know about it, I guess. So, thanks. Any questions for the applicant or Eric? All right. Is there any public comment on the sanitary sewer main extension? All right. Seeing none, I will close the hearing and entertain a motion.
I would move that we approve the excavation permit for a sanitary sewer main extension for service to Certificate of Survey 3554 Parcel A on Kona Ranch Road.
I'll second that.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. And last up, we have a hearing for the Running W Ranch phasing plan modification. I'll open that with a staff report from Tim Worley.
For the record, Tim Worley with CAPS, and I'm here to present a phasing plan modification request for Running W Ranch, which is a Y area subdivision located northeast of Muraltz and east of Highway 93. Originally approved August 31, 2005. It's been subject to a number of phasing plan extensions and amendments, as well as condition amendments. Essentially, the request is to create a Phase 2A, which is the phase that you see in red there. Well, what does this achieve? It ends up looping a water line and completes a loop road. And the request is to have this filed by May 31st, 2021, but I know the applicant would like to actually get going on this earlier than that. We did get some agency comment on this request regarding area drainage issues and the fact that Running W Ranch has changed over time. And relating the drainage issues, It's clear that Running W should be distinguished from other development in the area. There have been some runoff events in early April. One in particular is from this drainage to the northeast and actually had really nothing to do with Running W Ranch. Drainage went under a culvert under Highway 93 and ended up causing some problems on the north side of Wallow Road and on the southern edge of this subdivision right here. That was entirely outside of Running W Ranch. There's actually a fairly sophisticated drainage plan that Running W Ranch has put together showing that they are sort of outside of that area that caused significant drainage problems, although there was some drainage issues on the detention area or within the detention area that's used by Running W Ranch. This water is actually released under Highway 93 by way of a 36-inch culvert that releases water to the north and the east, kind of toward Jellystone. And this is the detention area used by Running W Ranch and also the armory. It's within the armory complex. This is the easement exhibit showing the area that detains water and allows it to be released under Highway 93 if it gets to a certain depth. Based on some of the comments that we received from Water Quality District in particular, we're recommending a reevaluation of drainage for Running W Ranch subdivision. We worked with WGM Group to come up with a new condition of approval that requires reevaluation of drainage in the area. It includes both the detention and the outfall area, and the detention and outfall area are pretty much contained in this right here, this structure that's within the Armory complex, which essentially is phase 11 of Running W Ranch subdivision. So this reevaluation has to be completed by phase 3, final plat approval. And this is a pretty wordy condition. It's actually in your paperwork, commissioners, if you want to dig into the details of it. Again, WGM collaborated with us to put this together. And it, again, allows for reevaluation of drainage with each phase coming forward from phase 3, 4, all the way up, theoretically, through phase 11. But in summary, here's your motion. I move to approve the Running W phasing plan modification to include phase 2A, which shall be submitted by May 31st, 2021, subject to the conditions included in attachment D.
Tim, if we were to adopt this, would you want us to read the new condition into the verbal record as well?
I don't know that it's absolutely necessary. It's pretty verbose, I think, since it's, I mean.
Okay. I know sometimes you guys make us do that, so I didn't want somebody to have to
don't know.
read that if we don't have to.
I don't believe it's necessary,
Okay, thanks.
unless John wants to correct me on that.
Great. And is the applicant or the applicant's representative here?
Hello, for the record, my name's Ryan Salisbury. I'm a civil engineer with WGM Group. Nice to meet you, Commissioner Schlotnick. I've represented the Running W subdivision for quite a while. There's been some good things happening out there. We've seen more activity. Just a little bit of background on the project. Phases 1 and 2 has approximately 70 lots in it. We saw quite a bit of construction activity for single-family homes last summer, and this summer, that small cul-de-sac road, everything in white is what is phase 1 and 2 there, is going to be built, and so we'll have 6 more lots come online. I've always envisioned Running W Ranch as a bit of a Belgrade to Bozeman, where it's an opportunity for people to have homes in the county cheaper than the city of Missoula. So I do think it has a good future. There's a little bit of timing that happened here with that storm in April, and we do feel like running the phase 2A. The primary reason for phase 2A is we've gotten comments from city sheriff or county sheriff and fire that they've responded to emergency calls on that Snapdragon Loop. And because it's 2 dead-end roads intended to come around, they've gone down the wrong street and then had to back out or get turned around and go down the other street, which is kind of an issue for emergency services. And then we've also heard comment over the years from the school district that it would be a lot easier for the bus routing if they could loop around and pick up those kids in a different fashion. So those were part of the catalyst for just going with phase 2A. And we've got new condition language, and there was some runoff issues that happened. We did work with county staff on the language, and there's already some existing conditions for stormwater analysis at each phase prior to final plat for this project. So that's just a little bit of background on why phase 2A. If you have any other questions, I'm here to answer them.
Right. And so the new condition gives you no heartburn?
Well, the developer's concerned. The cost of that analysis, I mean, you have to understand that pond that's there now was built to accommodate 300 lots. We're with 67 or 70 some lots in phase 1 and 2, and then the other 12 or 14 that we're proposing with phase 2A. We're still under not even a third of what that detention pond was sized for. We understand that things have changed with the armory from the original preliminary plat. That developer's concern is it'll take 2 to 3 months probably for that study by the time we meet with County Public Works and make sure our revised study meets all what they want to see, and then it'll take us a month to do the calculations. There's an electronic stormwater model because it's all piped system. And so it's probably a $10,000 effort in 2 to 3 months to do this study. So it is significant from the developer's standpoint. But we'll do the best we can with the County Public Works Department and we did confirm with Brent O'Connor that this would be reviewed by Missoula County. If it was reviewed by DEQ 8, that would be a pretty significant hardship because the requirements in DEQ 8 are different. And the stormwater analysis from 2006 was the conservative storm. It was the 24-hour 100-year, which is the most conservative in the county regulations. So the developer feels like they have spent a lot of time and energy and done things by the book and right, and they have some concern about the costs associated with the condition.
And how would this condition differ from how you said before each phase is filed, there will be something to do with the drainage to make sure it's still?
That was something that Tim had concern about, that he didn't feel like it was covered. I don't know if you can expand on that. Condition 47 is the one that's existing.
Yeah, I think in speaking with Brent O'Connor out at County Public Works, I think he would prefer to see calculations phase by phase just to make sure that the original design is robust enough to address the new phases as they are coming online. Now, theoretically, that was done at the beginning with Running W Ranch, but the original Running W Ranch didn't anticipate things like the Armory complex. There's been change over time, and I think that's part of the concern. And also just environmental conditions. There's just more known now about the high water table out here and some of the runoff events that have occurred in the last 10 or 15 years. There's just more experiential knowledge, I guess, in the county about what's going on out here. We definitely want to isolate Running W's issues to Running W and not make them solve other people's problems. Like, if you go north of Running W Ranch, there's significant kind of open swale drainage issues in Spring Meadow subdivision. We definitely don't want to make Running W address those particular issues. And we don't have any regulatory reason to do that anyway.
And so with the Armory there, and it wasn't there before, the detention pond is still there and in the same size as it was when this was approved originally. But now the Armory adds more impermeable surface that also goes into that pond, or?
Those are two things. The pond originally contemplated with Running W had moved with the Armory project. PCI did an analysis with the Armory project, another engineering company here in town. So it shifted, and it hasn't been, PCI at one time analyzed the Armory project and the Running W for that detention pond. So, with the previous work done by professional engineers, I'm confident in that sizing of that pond, that it's sized correctly. But it sounds like County Public Works would like some reassurance in revisiting those changes to make sure, is it right?
I guess I don't know, like, do we make engineers do their calculations twice every time there's if those calculations have already been done by a professional consultant in projects that were approved, do we go back and make them redo their calculations? And then also the problem that happened in April and some of the other problems that have happened before are not, again, it's solving other people's problems maybe. I mean, that drainage that had nothing to do with this subdivision. And some of the other drainage issues also are like adjacent to this subdivision, but they're not caused by this subdivision. And so I'm a little, I don't know if we're like doing overkill by making them go back and do studies that have already been done.
Just want to ask an open-ended question here. I'm with you on why have engineers consider the same issue twice. However, is the question, has the situation changed? If the drainage situation has changed because of the armory or because of different patterns of runoff, then that would render the first set of calculations no longer accurate and we'd have to do them again. I guess I'd want to be sure that the situation has actually changed before asking engineers to reconsider the same problem twice.
Yeah, and I guess that's kind of specifically my question is when we say things have changed, it's that the armory is there and the pond moved, but weren't those calculations done when that was done? PCI did the calculations.
Yeah,
including
there was
this
a
subdivision.
letter amendment to the Running W storm drainage report and by PCI and stamped by a professional engineer.
And our Public Works has seen all that documentation and decided that it would like them to do it again.
Yeah, and I would say Water Quality District probably is the most concerned at this point.
And they were fully aware of the new study?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not here.
Wish they were.
Yeah, and I think Travis Ross with the water quality, I understand his intentions and they're great intentions. I think the concerns he had were isolated with a construction project that was under construction out of the Running W subdivision. And I think the other issues are downstream, maybe in that Jellystone area that is out of the Running W subdivision area. I mean, the way storm drainage works is you've got bare land pre-development, so you have a flow rate of where that stormwater went before the development, and then after the development, you create a detention area large enough to hold that water back and release it slower than after the development was occurred because you create more impervious area. So that pre-development number isn't going to change and hasn't changed since the subdivision was contemplated.
And one of the major problems was the sediment coming out of that piece it's by the highway, but not in the subdivision, correct? That had some mismanagement during some construction potentially that caused runoff.
Yeah,
turbine runoff.
the contractor did not have their best management practices in place, silt fence and straw bale wattles and whatnot. And that subdivision that development project is in the Ram Edition, not in Running W.
Right there. And that contributed in this April or to some of the problems, was it?
Yes, it was I think was it April 8th, Ryan? Do you
Yeah,
remember the date? It was the
April.
first week and a half of April. I think there were a couple separate events.
Yeah, and it drew attention in our office, the engineers, sometimes engineers, we looked at that April 8th one and then we also looked at a pretty major storm, not as big, the next week. And you didn't see nearly as much ponding of water the week later because we feel like in the April 8th event, a lot of the ground was still frozen. So there was very little infiltration. And then when you looked at the storm a week later, it kind of did what it normally does. There's more infiltration in a typical summer storm where you have some ground absorbing some of the runoff water more so than it did on the April 8th event.
So the predictions headed into the future are for more rain on snow events in spring. What do you think?
I've seen it for, I mean, I can think of an event 10 years ago when we were looking at a project north of 44 Ranch where the ground was frozen. It's a real event. I believe that the precipitation numbers that are used by, is it NOAA? Eric Anderson's here. He's the one who really knows the storm drainage stuff a lot better than I do. But I don't think the annual precipitation calcs, in my professional opinion, have changed that much. We may be seeing some climate change, but I don't think from the way we calculate storm drainage and assumptions based on, is it grass and how much runoff happens, I think there's quite a few areas that we're conservative. The 24-hour 100-year storm is a big storm for Missoula, so there's conservatism built in there as well.
So Tim, worst case scenario, if this condition, additional condition 49 was not added, what's the possible repercussions of that?
Well, there is another condition that requires post-development release of stormwater. It can't be any bigger than pre-development release. So there's sort of that element that's already in place. I think one of my issues, and maybe Ryan's already answered it, is are we talking about the 100-year 24-hour storm? Back in 2005, was that anticipated with the original drainage plan? And I think I'm hearing that it was.
Yes, it was. We looked it up in the report after we met with Travis Ross and Mr. Worley.
That's the current county standard, but apparently it was back in 05 too. I didn't recall that one.
So that alleviates some of your concern.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, we certainly want to do things right, you know. However, it's not only $10,000 to do the study, but the lost 4 months, you know, and when we're talking about developments and losing time on developments and all that does is drive the cost of these houses up and how much it's going to cost to develop it. All of that goes into the homeowners and makes projects much more expensive for people to ever try to purchase a home on the land. So if it's not necessary and it's already covered, I don't want to add more barriers for a developer.
I would second that sentiment and want to reiterate what I said earlier, that the predictions are for a whole lot more late spring or early spring precipitation, snow on rain events, and the 1 in 100 doesn't mean it happens only 1 in 100 years. It means that reflects a percentage of chance that that event could happen in any 1 year. And if these predictions if they continue to be true, we're going to see more of the same of 2005, and want to make sure you feel confident that 3-4 years from now, when this is an annual spring event, that this area is not going to be a swamp, and then people aren't coming back to us and to you saying, "What the heck did you all do?" So if you can look us in the eye and say, "That's not going to happen. We got it covered. Drainage is solid," then I'll be solid too. But I want to make sure
I
you feel
can
really
look
confident.
you in the eye that I am very confident that pond is the right size for 300 lots. And yeah, there was a little bit of ponding in it this spring, but that's what it's built to do. We didn't see potential for overtopping, and no, I am very confident that system is designed the way it's supposed and installed the way it's supposed to be.
For the future that will be wetter than it is now.
Yes.
Another question, Tim. So condition 47 that you referenced earlier, as far as plans for detention and release of stormwater being reviewed prior to final plat approval for each phase, does that give future opportunities to revisit exactly what we're talking about right now? If the uncertainty of climate change turns in a significantly bad direction and we're seeing a lot more runoff and such, might we be able to have another bite at the apple, so to speak, and revisit whether some additional analysis is needed?
I think you might have another opportunity to do that. I don't know if you would have that opportunity with the condition. When new phases come online, if there are things occurring that are causing problems like Commissioner Slotnick is talking about, I think by statute, you all can actually impose new conditions before new phases come online. Now, the way the condition's worded now, it really just makes reference to the design storm. And Travis and I have had some conversations back and forth. Well, is maybe the design storm is antiquated. It goes back to the early 1970s and the Soil Conservation Service. So, but anyway, if there's a systematic problem that we see developing, we can require new conditions in the future.
And the current status of the Running W subdivision is there's some significant infrastructure costs with Phase 3. I can say with very high confidence that you'll probably see this project back as a major plat amendment with some tweaks to try to make it more viable the next phase. So to the point that there are other opportunities, and I think that storm drainage analysis, if the lot layout changes, would be redone in the future, for sure, would have to be redone.
Given what you both said, I feel a little better about it.
So in light of that, would it be appropriate to move to strike a condition?
We haven't taken any public comment yet, have we?
Ah,
Thanks.
nice catch.
So yeah, before we do that, maybe we should open it up. So did you have any other presentation?
No, I
or-
mean, with Shane here, I think with that condition 47, when we submit plans with each phase, if the county has concerns about something, that's the opportunity you would ask us to look at it. Is that accurate?
I would defer to Eric or Tim.
They're all pointing at each
I think
other.
that
That's a lot
we're
of finger
going to
pointing.
get to look at every phase's grading and drainage and make sure that the water released pre and post development are essentially the same, or not greater post development.
Thanks.
Well, and you've got a big pond out there, and we've got a tall concrete. It's a manhole essentially, and the way it works, the way we're controlling that is, you've got a hole or an orifice drilled of the right size for that pre-development flow. So that's all the water that can get out of that pond. As the level rises in there, there's additional holes so that more water for those bigger events are releasing downstream as it did pre-development. So, those holes are fixed. That's how much water was designed to go out to meet pre-development flows, and that's the way it functions today. So there isn't a lot that we can do in regards to changing that, knowing that it was analyzed and designed to release at pre-development flows.
But if in a couple of years it shows that it's not working, you can expand the size of those holes or add more holes.
Yeah, you can add more holes, or the Running W system is a really good storm drainage system from the standpoint that it goes through a grass riparian area that's not the detention pond, then it goes underneath Running W Road, and then it hits the detention pond. So in my opinion, we've got pre-treatment in through the wetlands, and then we've got a detention pond that's sized to release it. And yes, to answer your question, down the road, if there are problems or calculations show that something's undersized, yes, that can easily be done. And towards the later phases in this project, it's very important.
And Mr. Stark, you're about an hour too late.
Peter, we gave Sawmill Gulch to Mineral County. Sorry.
We're done with Sawmill Gulch.
Yeah, we approved the petition. We approved the petition to accept Sawmill Gulch as a county road.
Okay, well,
Thought you'd like that, yeah. All right. Is there any public comment on the Running W Ranch phasing plan modification?
Hello, I'm Eric Anderson. I'm also with WGM. I'm a civil engineer and kind of had my head in the drainage and stormwater for this project. I didn't originally do it, design it, but I've looked back through all the reports, including the old PCI reports, so I have a pretty good idea of what happened and what's going on. And I just wanted to address a couple things that sound like there were questions out there. One was that I guess the design storm event is old, and That's kind of true. NOAA in our area, they haven't updated the statistics for the 100-year event since the late 70s. But MDT has updated those. We currently, at least our firm, uses those, and we take a look at them. And looking at the 100-year event, statistically here, at least, it hasn't changed that much. In other areas, it hasn't changed that much. MDT did that analysis about 3 years ago. So just wanted to speak to that point. And then the reoccurrence alone, the 100-year event, in my experience, that's pretty conservative around here. I mean, a 100-year event is enormous rain event. And most areas designed to a much smaller storm event. DEQ 8, when they're reviewing, they require the analysis to the 10-year storm event. And I used to practice in Virginia, and that's pretty common there too. You detain to the 10-year event. You look at the 100-year event, but only for like safe passage. So here it's more conservative. You actually have to detain that water to pre-developed conditions for the 100-year event, which is quite a bit more stringent than the 10-year event. So I wanted to speak to that point. And then the other point, this subdivision is part of a bigger drainage that encompasses older developments, both commercial and residential, that were there long before it. And some of that comes to the same pond. And so the pond is designed to mimic the conditions before the Running W subdivision, including those other developments, which were older before there was any stormwater regulations. So I don't know if this is the case here because I haven't done the analysis, but frequently when you have cases like that, there could have already been a drainage problem in an area, and then a new development comes in, and it's detaining its own water, and it's mimicking what was there prior to its development, but there could still be a problem downstream because there was already a problem from all these other developments that have no stormwater control. So it's kind of easy to like point the finger at the last guy who came in, but in reality, there could be more of a regional problem. And I don't know if that's the case here, but I've looked at a lot of different cases in other areas where that happens. So just wanted to shed a little bit more light on that and answer any questions. If you have anything technical, that'd be my bag.
Any technical questions? Thanks.
Sure.
Any public comment on the Running W Ranch phasing plan modification? All right, seeing none, I will close the hearing and entertain either, I suppose we don't need to strike the motion. We just don't add it. Yeah, take that out. Yeah. Is that what you suggest too?
Yeah, that's what I would recommend. And in the approval letter, we'll just put the period at the end of 2021, and we'll send a list of conditions that doesn't include this new recommendation, if that makes sense.
Yep, great. Unless either of you wants to move to add that condition.
I'm given the language in 47 and the fact that this is multiple phases and we're going to revisit this later, that if things go haywire, we'll have other chances to solve the problem, makes me feel better about it. So I'd move to approve the Running W phasing plan modification to include Phase 2-A, which shall be submitted by May 31st, 2021.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All right. Under other business today, there will not be action taken on this item, but we are going to get a preview of the subdivision regulations maintenance changes.
All right. We are in the process of updating the Missoula County subdivision regulations and would like to give you a preview. We're experimenting a little bit with a new venue in bringing this, not at CAPS update, but on a Thursday afternoon. Just as a reminder, this is not a public hearing. We will have that public hearing on the 6th of June. We are covering the road standards and the fire hazard assessment in our recommended changes. So why these two areas? They were called out as priorities, and we've heard from particularly the private sector on roads, requests for change, and we think there's a significant potential for positive impact with these recommended changes. Now, this is part of a larger maintenance project that includes legislative changes to the regulations where most chapters will be updated. We're only recommending changes to a small part of Chapter 3 and Appendix C. So let's start with the road standards. This is the road table that was in existence from about 2013 up through 2016. As you can tell, it contains a lot of information. The essence of it is roads get bigger as you have more dwelling units or lots. We've retained that concept. Here are the road widths as you move from left to right in the table. There's something missing, however, and that is there's no real distinction between urban and rural roads. And the table back in 2013, and this was true even prior to that, captured a diversity of information, but maybe captured too much information. It was a very busy table. So we actually created an urban and rural distinction in our subdivision regulations where roads look different within the Missoula and Lolo urban areas than outside of those areas. This is the table in the current subdivision regulations where the rural standards are in orange, the urban standards are in yellow, and we're not recommending any adjustments to the rural standards. We think they work just fine. But what we found with the urban standards is the larger classification roads got way too wide. Now, our goal in creating that table was to create roads, yes, that have the urban and rural distinction, but that can also be maintained by county equipment such as snowplows. But what we found is that roads of larger classification just additively became too wide. And actually, ironically, Running W Ranch has an example. Its main collector road is 42 feet wide from back of curb to back of curb. And that was one of the inspirations for slimming down some of these road widths. We felt that roads can be reduced in width and still remain drivable and parkable. And this is Lolo Creek Trails. This was actually one of our examples of a very drivable, parkable neighborhood road network. What we ended up doing is we met with public and private sector engineers. We took a look at roads that work and roads that are chronic problems. And we took a look actually at parking too, parking on one side, parking on both sides. And we came up with some recommendations to substantially slim down roads, including a no parking 24-foot wide collector road concept. What this ends up meaning is overall less asphalt for the developer, decreased cost, and consistency with the county's sustainability goals, including reduced energy expenditures and reduced CO2 emissions. Of course, with narrower roads, you end up reducing speeds, and we think you better define both driving areas and parking spaces. So this, if you look in the back of the packets that I handed out, this is the revised road table. And by the way, that's the exact same staff report that Planning Board received 2 nights ago. And I will hand out a different copy when we get back together on the 6th of June. But where you see underline and strike through, in all those cases, we reduced road widths. We weren't able to reduce every last category of road, but we covered most of them. We did get one agency comment from Public Works, and that is we decided instead of saying lots or dwelling units, just to say lots or units within the table, because we're dealing with commercial and industrial applications. And Public Works, Deb Evison from Public Works says we ought to really define units. Currently, our preference would be to just consider the plain meaning of the word. I'm actually having a hard time finding a good definition of unit, even looking at different regulations that are out there. We would prefer not to define unit as it stands by itself. We do have a definition for dwelling unit in the subdivision regulations that we'd like to retain. Another category of road that we made some adjustments to is off-site roads. In fact, we essentially added that category of road back into the subdivision regulations. These roads are defined as a road right-of-way not entirely contained within the boundaries of a subdivision. Here's a couple of examples. On the left, you have South Avenue providing access to a subdivision. South Avenue is the off-site road for that subdivision. And on the right, you have George Elmer Drive, which is the off-site road serving 44 Ranch subdivision and Flynn Ranch subdivision in the Mullen Road area. On the right, that is a city example of an off-site road, but I think it shows, particularly with the 24-foot wide off-site road that we're trying to achieve something comparable to what you see with George Elmer Drive. And this is getting pretty far south in the county. I think this is Lund Road or Lund Drive. The Ravalli County line is right here. And these are the types of off-site roads that really get a little bit more scrutiny because sometimes they end up being 2 tracks, they end up being very steep, and we need some mechanism to evaluate those types of roads without making them too wide. Our goal is to promote emergency vehicle access standards for these types of roads, to reintroduce the concept of a uniquely attributable off-site road, and again, to address roads that front a subdivision. So let's talk about the concept of a uniquely attributable off-site road. These are roads that must be built simply to access the subdivision. No subdivision road exists, and let's say a 30-lot subdivision is put together. They need to build a road to it. Well, that road has to meet the standards in the table itself, the on-site road standards. So for roads that aren't uniquely attributable to the subdivision, and that would be true of the visual examples I showed earlier, those must meet basic standards for width, clearance, and grade. They have to be accessible year-round. And for larger subdivisions, that off-site road may have to exceed basic standards based on a traffic study. Now that's if you get 50 units or bigger in your scale. We've introduced some cost-sharing concepts such as RSIDs, payback provisions, and cost-share agreement references, although we don't really have those mechanisms dialed in per se in the off-site road section. We do make reference to them. As I mentioned a couple nights ago, we went to planning board and gave a presentation on this concept. They did have some questions over the order of the standards. If you look at the off-site road standards, they go from the general to the specific, and that was by design. They also thought that we should check in with the city about their opinion of our road standards, since our road table looks vastly different than theirs does, particularly since an annexation policy is in the making. And that's something I have not done yet, but will do before June 6th. And the second amendment piece that we're working toward is the fire hazard assessment. It is an appendix to the subdivision regulations. It is from the International Wildland Urban Interface Code, and it scores hazard level. It's been in use since November 2016. Different elements are scored for risk. The higher the overall score, the higher the hazard. If you score moderate to high in your overall score, that's considered a wildfire hazard area. Some positive impacts we've seen since late 2016. We feel that this appendix has impacted building materials and encouraged ongoing fire fuels management. The appendix in general tackles things like access, fuel types, defensible space, and building materials. One change that we're recommending is the very first section of the appendix. We feel that this section should distinguish between subdivisions where every lot has 2 ways in and out and other scenarios that aren't as optimal. It'd be great if every subdivision in the WUI did have two ways in and out. And we're trying to encourage that whenever possible. We felt some clarifications were needed, such as what are light, medium, and heavy fuels. For instance, if you have large diameter trees on your property, is that an example of light fuels or is that heavy fuels? And shouldn't fuel type influence the score more? If you look at fuel type now, it goes from 1 to 5 to 10. We think it should be more like defensible space, which is scaled from 1 to 10 to 20. And then we found over time that the defensible space category has led to inconsistent scoring. We're trying to get that a little bit more dialed in. So here's our recommendations. And a lot of these come from the Office of Emergency Management. We're making adjustments to fuel types. We're recommending that change to fuel hazard. Under defensible space, OEM recommends that be called treated space. And then for all these, even topography, we're recommending that there be professional oversight for this section. So a professional would actually fill in this section. The subdivider can fill in things like that subdivider's choice for building materials, et cetera, but this section needs to be filled out by a professional approved by the county, and that can be the county fire inspector, it could be Missoula Rural Fire District, or another professional approved by the county. We're also recommending an attachment for Appendix C that provides visual examples of low, medium, and high hazard contexts for residential development. So again, we've clarified some terms. For fuel types, we think that should be termed fuel hazard, and we bumped those numbers up from 1, 5, and 10 to 1, 10, and 20. Under defensible space, we're recommending the term treated space. And this whole section has to be overseen by the fire inspector or other county approved official. So planning board's reaction to this was actually to consider retaining the term defensible space, and I think they actually made a good argument for that. Treated space almost implies that treatment is warranted in every case, and maybe it's not. And since a professional will be overseeing this section anyway, maybe it's okay to leave the current term of defensible space, since that's, as one member said, that's a term of art. So let's go ahead and leave that. I don't think we would necessarily object to that ultimately. And planning board did have some questions about, do we have adequate staff to conduct these reviews? So in planning board's motion to approve the changes to the subdivision regulations, they included references to retaining defensible space versus treated space, and encourage staff to connect with city staff regarding road widths. And just in summary, the subdivision regulations in general are required by state law, and we are required within those regulations to address issues of public health and safety and address things like transportation. We found in reviewing these against the growth policy that these changes are consistent with the county's sustainability and climate change goals, particularly the road changes that we're recommending, and that what we're recommending ends up being a balance between the public interest and minimizing regulation. So staff's recommendation is approval, and we will make a presentation on June 6th, and I will summarize planning board's action at that time and actually provide you with a paper copy of that. And you will also have a separate request for commission action, but your staff report will probably look the same. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
And I guess since this is kind of a new thing, these previews are new, is this the time, if we have questions we would ask, or should we email them to you and then they become part of the record for when we have the real hearing, or we save our questions for the real hearing, or what's the format that we should go with?
Yeah, that's a good question. I tend to think that if there's any blockbuster questions, we probably should revisit those on the 6th, but I don't know like when we get to that level versus a more pedestrian kind of question, I guess. John, I don't know if you have a sense of the difference there. as far as questions and interaction that we have at this.
And just if, and I guess why I ask is obviously process, but also since this isn't noticed as an action item, would public not come to it and then not, I mean, they could always go back and hear this hearing, but I hesitate to like ask all our questions and have a full discussion when when maybe the public doesn't expect that to happen at this time.
I don't have any significant heartburn if there's something that you want to bring to the attention of Tim and Caps, I think now would be okay. I mean, it was on a public agenda. It's on TV. It's going to be transcribed in full and available to the public prior to June 6th. So if it's something that will make the process more efficient between now and June 6th, I don't necessarily have a problem having at least some light discussion.
Could I ask Tim a question? What's your response to the planning board's concerns about staffing?
I think it's a really good question, and I don't know that we have a great answer, to be honest, because we're in transition. We're actually, Adrienne has all she can handle right now, obviously, between flood season and fire season. She has this little window between the two where she can do things outside of her normal. Ken Parks obviously assists her in those sorts of things. And we don't have really the answer of, we would like to move sort of beyond OEM being the point when it comes to county fire inspection. Now, in the Missoula Rural Fire District, I think we can trust that they will stand in the gap for that geographic area, but everywhere else is the question. That's where the county fire inspector.
Is there any concern with the rural fire districts taking on inspection of landowners nearby, that if they see something they don't like, they may have to deal with that person on a regular basis, and that could potentially put them in a tough spot. Whereas if the inspector was not from that area, that he or she may be more willing to be brutally objective.
I think the county fire inspection system has worked quite well because it equalizes all that. It takes out that if you're in Clinton, for instance, and you're making a tough recommendation for a subdivision in the WUI, that's going to be controversial amongst neighbors. The county fire inspector doesn't have to deal with that sort of local political stuff. So we would definitely champion an independent inspector for those areas still. And I think Missoula Rural being more in kind of the urban part of the county, I think they feel the freedom to do what they need to do to enforce fire code. So I think the system really works pretty well. Now we just need to find that perfect inspector. And when we had the economic slowdown, the challenge with the inspector was that they would get work 1 month, but they might not see work for another 2 months. That's not true anymore, but finding that economic sweet spot, if it's not contained within an office in the county, that's going to be part of the challenge.
Okay, thanks.
So the suggestion would be to hire a third-party contractor to do all these, and that would be paid for by
the
subdivision fees?
The fire fees, basically. We have a fire fee system where you pay basically per inspection, per lot, and it's based on a study.
People are already paying that, and it would not increase with a third-party inspector?
That's correct. In fact, it was actually the study was based on what it would cost essentially a private sector engineer to do that work.
Well, and unless I'm missing something, and I thanks so much for the work you've done. I think the suggested modifications to the fire hazard assessment are great and spot on. Unless I'm missing something, it doesn't strike me as this whatever inspection might occur, it would be super onerous. And if we're talking Appendix C, and also thinking just how do we quantify how much time and level of effort would have to go into that by county staff or someone else, it doesn't strike me as this is going to take days worth of time. It's going to take a field visit, and a lot of this can probably just be eyeballed. But I could be wrong. But and also, those of us sitting here kind of at the tail end of the process, so we never know exactly what's in the queue as far as how many subdivision proposals are in the pipeline that would require this sort of assessment of fire hazards. So it would be interesting to know just how much of a work effort this would be by our own staff or someone else to do. Maybe it's not as much as we might think it is, but then again, I have no idea. I'm just speculating.
And how did we define the urban standards? Like who has to follow urban standards versus rural standards?
Urban standards are typically within those boundaries I showed. Just bring up the map. It's really the wastewater treatment plant service area for Missoula, and then Lolo's RSID 901.
So it's not like the statutory definition of rural for
Right.
roads and urban for roads. It's our own areas that we've defined.
That's right.
And Tim, could you just say a few words that while it is true that it looks like in most road width categories there's proposed reduction, there are a couple instances where it looks like there are slight increases in road width, such as local/private small lot goes from 22 to 24 feet.
I think that was a parking related issue there, that for parking on one side to be accommodated and get adequate fire or emergency vehicle clearance there, we actually had to increase that width a little bit.
Okay, thanks.
In general, we tried to actually curtail. We saw a number of not so good examples of parking on one side in kind of medium-sized Missoula County subdivisions, and it ends up pitting neighbors against neighbors a little bit, because you have one side of a street that's striped yellow where you can't park, and if you have a house there, that's great, because you park on the other side of the street where everybody else loads up the parking, and you don't have to worry about a car sitting out in front of your house. And we've seen actual conflict about that. So with larger classification streets, the recommendation was to actually get away from that. But for the smaller streets, we felt that parking on one side is still doable.
How did we
Small lot projects.
How did we differentiate? You said we looked at like what was working well and what wasn't working well. Who got to decide what was and wasn't working well?
Well, we had sort of an informal working group that included Eric and Brent from Public Works and a number of private sector engineers, and we just worked off consensus. And this table was passed around, and people got out their pens, and we talked about what were appropriate widths. And really, Public Works had the final say on what these widths ended up being.
Okay. Just because Lolo Creek Trails might not be a great example, because in their covenants, they don't allow residents to park on the streets for more than a few days. So even though you can park on the street by county regs, nobody really parks on the street unless they're visiting in that subdivision. Mm-hmm. So that it's like, well, yeah, then it's going to work well there. When our plows go through, Public Works is going to think that works well, but it's because by the covenants, people aren't actually allowed to park there for very long. So
it's maybe under park for what it should be.
By what it would be allowed to be by county regulations.
Yeah, okay.
But
that's good to know.
I used to live there too. So. All right, does anybody have any questions they want to talk about now? Okay, sounds good. So this will come up to us on June 6th?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Is there any other business to come before the commission? All right, seeing none, we will adjourn. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.